Well, last time, Michael, we had talked. I went back and looked at our interview yesterday, and it was a very wide-ranging discussion. I mean, you walked me through some of your family's really amazing history. We talked Ellis Island. You talked about the impact of your parish priest and kind of the civil rights movement. And those turbulent times, your early writing experiences in high school. I love the point where you talked about how your family and your education, inculcates in you a sense of, what it means to live the good life, right? The philosophers have talked about for millennia. And it was really geared towards, not only what do I do for myself and my own people, but for others.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we also talked about this very exciting incident with the Red Baron. I forgot completely about that.
So had I, until you mentioned that we talked about that.
Yeah, the foreboding you felt as soon as he adopted a Hollywood persona or something. But I was also, it was very interesting how you talked about wanting to initially, your thoughts were, going into psychotherapy.
Yeah.
It was a booming field at that time. There's a lot of exciting, literature and new practices coming out. And then you more or less caught the research and teaching bug.
Yeah.
And, your advisor who had an enormous impact on you said, hey, try the academic thing for a while. And, if it doesn't work out, you can always kind of go to, this other equally viable, route. And, we ended up talking about B.F. Skinner and some of the different approaches, behavioralism and whatnot. So that was kind of the general gist of that first interview. And so and just as kind of a formal, tagline, and Deborah wants me to do this always, it's September 13th, 2022. I'm talking to Dean Michael Perri, who we did our first interview back in March. And so I wonder, Michael, do you want to kind of talk? It might be interesting to talk a little more, maybe, and it's okay if we tread the same ground again, because I think there's interesting. You had some thoughts about when you first kind of got the research and teaching bug, and I was going to ask you to go a little more into like what really grabbed you about teaching and research, like maybe experiences you had with your early classes in the classroom, and then maybe some of your early, research.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah. So my first teaching experience was as a teaching assistant at the University of Missouri, where I was a graduate student, and it was for an intro to psychology class, I guess it was. And the way it worked then was there would be two large auditorium-filled lectures given by a faculty member. And then there would be a discussion session each week for an hour led by a TA. And so that was my first experience serving as a TA. And I remember one incident that happened at the end of the very first class. A young lady came up to me and said, "Hey, when are you going to learn our names?" And it was a really eye-opener. And I said, wait a second, yeah, I didn't go around the room and ask each person to introduce herself or himself to me. And that was the first thing I did the next class. But what she was reminding me is that this isn't just a task. This is an interpersonal kind of process here. And we want to engage with you as a person, and we want you to engage with us as a person. Now, she didn't say that. She just said, when are you going to learn our names? But she was really important in the sense of telling me, hey, these are people in this classroom who want to relate to me as a person, in addition to learning about the topic here. And I enjoyed being a TA, and I think the following year I was offered an opportunity to be an instructor for my own course, and it was, I think, called Psychology of Adjustment, which didn't mean a whole lot. What it was supposed to mean was, how do people adapt to different circumstances, as opposed to, say, abnormal psychology, where we're talking about mental and psychiatric disorders. And it was a great experience. I enjoyed teaching, and the students were incredibly responsive and very much into the class. And we did a combination of, part of the class was lecture, but a lot of the class was what we would call is almost kind of like a flipped learning kind of piece, where, what we would do is use that second part of the class for interactions. We did a lot of role play of different kinds of circumstances, and students got into it, I got into it, and I really enjoyed interacting with the students and found it really rewarding. So that was how I got bitten by the teaching bug. On the research side, my mentor early on said, "You want to help with a couple of research projects?" And the very first projects were, how do we help? It was actually more of a counseling psychology type project. How do we help students be more effective and efficient in their study habits? And it was pretty cool. We did a study where we taught different behavioral methods that could enhance just educational methods to help students improve their study skills, and got some good results. And the paper got published, and so that's a big rewarding experience. And I remember both for myself personally, but also then classmates and friends saying, "Hey, that's pretty cool." After first year in graduate school, you already got a publication. And the fun thing about it was that, unlike teaching the same class over and over again, as you know, with research, what you do is take what you've learned at that point and say, okay, what comes next in the sequence? And the next project is new and different. It may build on the previous one. And I thought that was cool too, that the fact that there's the change, and there's the growing, and there's the thinking, how can we make this bigger, better, and improved based on what we know already? So those are the two things that happened in grad school early on. And then by the time I got to my third year in graduate school, then we started doing rotations, hospital-based rotations. And I was assigned to the local VA hospital. And that was a good experience, because I got introduced to the area that's called medical or health psychology, helping people with medical problems who are dealing with their adjustment to that illness. And I really enjoyed that. And then that kind of melded that together with my academic interest moving forward. And so those were, important influences on me as I developed professionally.
Yeah. I want to do something kind of unusual, Michael, if you don't mind, and
Sure.
kind of jump way forward to, now you're a dean at the University of Florida. Have you been able to really take those early experiences in teaching and research, and now as an administrator, kind of replicate those in your work as an administrator, or are you trying to do something different?
Yeah, so I think that all that stuff has, I think, a lasting kind of impact on my perspective and in the approach that I've taken or have espoused with our faculty. So, for example, early on when we first started making greater use of technology, I was not a big fan of classes that were purely asynchronous, that didn't have a live face-to-face component to it, and actually was more of a fan of what we call blended learning, where it would not just simply be have some sessions that were recorded and played asynchronously, and then have a session online that was live, but rather try to have the live session actually in person, in the classroom, face to face with the students, so that the students could have that experience of interacting with the faculty member. And so probably, this is probably about 10 years ago, we established something called the Blended Learning Task Force, which was essentially our way of how we were going to move toward doing pretty much a flipped classroom kind of approach. But the emphasis was going to be in terms of the part that was face-to-face, trying whenever possible to make that be live and in person, so that the students would be interacting in the same room with the faculty member. So that was important to me. Then in terms of on the research side, less impact in terms of how I tried to get others to do research, except in terms of mentoring junior faculty members. But probably did some of the same things that my mentor did in terms of inviting graduate students to get involved in my research. At the peak of my research, which was probably 4 or 5 years ago, I probably had a team of 7 or 8 graduate students at that time. And our projects were incredibly collaborative. So when we put together a grant proposal, every single person on the team was involved in that work. I always did the first draft, but one of the things that I learned was that every single person has a different perspective. And without a doubt, getting everyone else to make their comments and give their edits and suggestions improves our grant proposals. We did the same thing in terms of role-playing and rehearsing how we would do presentations at meetings, in terms of drafts of papers that were based on students' master's theses or their first-year projects, where we did it as a kind of a group effort with everybody participating in it. Jumping back a little bit, before I became dean, I was the associate dean for research. And one of the things that we started that was kind of unique, which is a pretty common process now, was something that we called a grant work group for new faculty members. And what we did was, this was open only to assistant professors, no graduate students, no postdocs. But myself and 2 other senior faculty members met every 2 weeks with all the assistant professors in the college. And we said, bring in anything related to a grant that you want help with, and we'll work with you. It could be an idea on the back of a napkin. It could be the critiques that you've just received from an NIH or NSF review panel, but we'll help you with it. And what we tried to do then was to have the materials that faculty members wanted help with circulated to everyone at least 2 days before we met, and then actually would meet with them and go over and give our feedback and suggestions for improvement. Now, I think that it was helpful in 2 ways, and I'll use a little bit of psychology speak. It was helpful in terms of instrumental support, and it was helpful in terms of emotional support. The instrumental support essentially means they learned things. They learned how to do things, some of the methods. And the other 2 faculty members with me, we intentionally tried to get the 3 of us to cover different domains. So I covered kind of the behavioral and social domain. We had a faculty member who was from physical therapy, and her background, she covered the biological and physiological domains. And then we had somebody from public health with the broader public health perspective. So we were able to provide concrete advice in terms of both content and style. And that's the instrumental support. But the other part that we found that was a big success, and this is more qualitative, was the emotional support. It gave the assistant professors a chance to meet each other and find, hey, I'm not the only one struggling, with this whole notion of, am I going to succeed academically? Am I ever going to get a grant? Am I going to make progress toward tenure? And so it was cool for them to have peers who were in the same boat. And many of them then ended up becoming not just colleagues, but friends as well. And so I think that some of the early experiences I had were influential then later on in terms of both how I ran my own lab, but also then in terms of mentoring junior faculty.
Well, the list of your accomplishments, and I'm looking now, at your biography page. There's so many things you've done, Michael, at the College of Public Health and Health Professions. You were dean from 2007 to 2022. These things, but just to kind of refresh, for our audience, our future audience, you essentially, basically double the size of the faculty from 105 to nearly 200. The number of degrees awarded really blossoms. You have a bachelor's in public health, a doctorate in occupational therapy, PhD programs in biostatistics, environmental health, epidemiology, One Health, social and behavioral sciences. For you, kind of thinking back, out of all these accomplishments, what have been kind of the core ones that allowed you to build the college? Like, what if you can kind of go back to the early years, like, when you come to this position?
Yeah. So I think that it's really important to kind of set the stage in a couple of ways. One is I came to the University of Florida in 1990, and I had a couple of academic positions before coming here. And it was 12 years post PhD when I came here. And I came here, I was attracted because UF, particularly in the area that I was interested in, health psychology, was a national leader. I also very much liked the idea of coming to a college, which at the time was called Health-Related Professions. It may be instructive for me to tell a little bit background about our college, if you don't mind my
Please, yeah.
So I'm going to go back. I wasn't there, but at the end of World War II, the president at the time asked the question, should we have a medical school here at the University of Florida? In part, there was a big demand for it because you had a lot of veterans coming back from the war, many of them trained in Florida at bases, military bases. And with the advent of air conditioning, there was a big migration to Florida, people moving to Florida. And so there was no medical school in the state anywhere. And the University of Miami was thinking about building one, but they would have been private. And so the president, who was J. Hillis Miller, put together a group to advise him on building a medical school. And the group came back and essentially said, no, don't build a medical school. What you need to build is a health science center. That would be a collection of colleges that educate people in the variety of different disciplines related to health. And so that would be nursing, pharmacy. It would be also include dentistry eventually. But all those different health professions ought to be educated together, and you ought to build a center for that. The group was very foresightful. They said, don't call it a medical center, call it a health center, because you want to focus not just on treatment of disease, but on promoting health and preventing disease. They suggested including science as part of the title to recognize that as an academic health center, that a key feature that distinguished it from just being a hospital, a community hospital, was that part of the mission was going to be discovery and figuring out ways of improving treatments and care for patients. So anyway, J. Hillis Miller accepted their recommendations and moved forward with building the UF Health Science Center. And as you may know, Miller died before it was completed. And it was completed in 1956, and they named it in honor of him. And at the time, I think it was called the J. Hillis Miller Health Science Center at the University of Florida. One of the people who was one of the advisors to Miller in that group was a fellow named Daryl Mays. And Daryl Mays worked for the university in its, they had a center that was kind of like a counseling center, but it was focused on students who had difficulties with learning problems. And he was the director of that center. He had a background, he had a PhD in speech and a PhD in psychology. And he was selected then as the first dean of the College of what was called Health-Related Services at the time. And he had this vision that all of the various disciplines that did not have an academic home, but were health professions, should be located in a college together, where they could learn together, also interact with their physician colleagues and their nursing colleagues. And so he was the person who put forward the idea for having a college of this type. And the college opened in 1958, and there were 10 faculty members and 15 students eventually. The three original disciplines were physical therapy, occupational therapy, and medical technology. And Daryl Mays had this very broad vision of expanding, and he very quickly did expand the college. He included, he was successful in adding speech pathology and audiology, which were, related to his training. He succeeded in getting the clinical psychology group in class in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences to move to the Health Science Center. And so that's how the department that I came to, clinical and health psychology, became part of this college, because they were doing their clinical work in the Health Science Center. He said, well, why doesn't the academic program move here as well? He started one of the first master's programs in health administration and added that. And the college continued to grow. Over time, it had clinical dietetics. It had the nurse practitioner program was located in this college. And he founded the American Association of Allied Health. He was its first president. And he received an award from the Secretary of Education for proposing this new educational model that would train allied health professionals. So there was a long and strong history in our college based on the very important work that our first dean did, Daryl Mays. When I came to the college, the dean was Dick Gudikins. And Gudikins had been dean from 1980, and he had a military background. I think he was a microbiologist and worked for the Navy and worked in the Navy. But after 2 years being on the faculty here, there was a recession in the state in the early 90s. And one of the things that Gudikins did, which he later confided that he regretted doing, was the way he dealt with the recession was by closing programs. And he decided that he could save money by closing the programs that had, in his view, the lowest amount of research productivity. And that was the criteria he was using. And he proposed closing I'm sorry, I had said earlier nurse practitioner. That was a mistake. I meant physician assistant program. He proposed closing the physician assistant program, the clinical dietetics program, and the medical technology program. Other colleges saw that very quickly and responded. The College of Medicine said, we'll take the physician's assistant program. They moved over there. IFAS then said, we'll take the clinical dietetics program because we have a nutrition program here, and we'll take the clinicians here. The one program that did not find a home was medical technology, and that was closed. That was instructive in a number of ways to me. One was it actually weakened the college significantly, I thought, in terms of decreasing the array of professions that were part of our portfolio. The second thing is it made the college significantly smaller. And then what started happening is every time, we go in these waves of boom and bust to some extent, because as a state university, we're highly dependent on funding from the legislature, which in turn is high, since there's no state income tax, is highly dependent on sales tax revenues. And so if the economy's not doing well, there's less money and the university budget goes down. You've probably experienced it during the course of your career. Economy's doing better, we sometimes do better as well. So there were a number of times that subsequently that the question was raised whether the College of Health-Related Professions should itself be either closed or merged with another college, merged onto medicine or put someplace else on campus. So those are important lessons. After Gutekunst retired, Bob Frank became the dean. Bob was very aware of this issue. And and I learned a lot from Bob. And one of the things I learned was that for the college to survive, it was necessary for it to grow. And that we needed to be an important player on the scene. And that was illustrated in a large faculty meeting that we had where Bob invited the provost at the time, Betty Capaldi, to come and meet with the faculty and to give the perspective of the provost's office on our college. And Bob asked Betty, where does the college fit in on the university level? And Betty, as you know, never minced words. And she said, let's put it this way. You guys are not even on the radar. She said, you don't exist. You're too small and you don't have much of an impact that we can see at all in Tigard Hall. And that was really eye-opening to hear that. And it was prescient in a number of ways. Bob was the one who came up with the idea of expanding the college to include public health. Daryl Mays had tried to include public health, was not successful. Other deans, including Gutekunst, had tried to include public health and were turned down. And at the time, the Board of Regents, we had a Board of Regents, what they determined was that public health was a niche area, and they gave it to the University of South Florida to have as a unique special program, and that they would only have it. What Bob Frank was successful in doing was putting together a partnership with medicine and the College of Health and Human Performance and getting approval to offer a master's in public health degree. What they did was they got approval to offer that, and then they came up with this scheme where they would rotate the administration of the Masters of Public Health among those three colleges, and they would do it on an annual basis. So our college would administer the program for a year, then we turn it over to medicine. They'd administer for a year, and then they turn it over to Health and Human Performance. Well, it didn't take more than one cycle to realize that that was an awful idea, because as soon as you learned all the problems you were turning and how to solve them, you were turning the program over to another college. So Chuck Young, I think, was the president at the time, and he said to each of the deans involved, give me a plan for how you would administer this program if it were solely within your college. And the deans at the time, I believe, were Pat Bird in Health and Human Performance, and I think it was Craig Tischer was the dean of medicine at the time, and Bob Frank, obviously, in our college. And Bob came up with the most ambitious plan. He saw this as here's an opportunity. He said, well, not only would we take over the Masters of Public Health, but we would add PhD programs also and seek accreditation as a school of public health, not just as a master's program in public health. At the time, what you needed to have was 3 PhD programs in public health disciplines in order to become a school of public health. And he said, a university of the stature of the university, such as the University of Florida, really ought to have a school of public health, not just a master's in public health. And surprisingly, everybody agreed with Bob, including the other 2 deans. And both of them threw their support behind Bob's proposal, and Chuck Young approved it. Bob also, part of that proposal included that the College of, the name was changed to Public Health and Health Professions, would get to keep all of the tuition that we generated. So as to pay for this, the university would help with startup funds to get the program going. So what happens then is that was about 2004, and Bob's then in 2005, Bob starts to build out to get, we really needed to have 30 public health faculty members, and we needed to have 3 PhD programs. But Bob was looking to become a provost, and he did get selected and became the provost at Kent State University early in 2007. And we were, midway in the build out. And at the time, I was the associate dean for research, and the VP for health affairs was Doug Barrett. And on Bob's recommendation, Doug asked me to be the interim dean of the college. Okay, here we are in 2007, June 18, 2007, I'm appointed interim dean. Come July 1st, the Great Recession starts in Florida. The bubble bursts. And the legislature asks for a callback in revenue. And I don't know if you were around then, but they actually took back money that had already been allocated because the housing bubble burst first in Florida before the recession hit the rest of the country, and state revenues were down. And in the course of the time of the recession, our college lost about a quarter of its budget, similar to the rest of the university, of its state part of its budget. Now, that would have been tough, but what made it even worse was when I took over as dean, the college was $1.3 million in the red. Some of it, there were a number of things that contributed to that. One is Bernie Matchin came in as president, and he said he thought that Chuck Young made a mistake in agreeing to allow us to keep our tuition, that was a bad precedent to allow any college to keep its tuition. And so he reversed that and said, you can't keep your tuition. You're just going to get a distribution from the provost's office like everyone else. But what I will do is give you $1 million, or you won't have to pay back $1 million in startup funds that we've given you already. So that $1 million is, we're going to forgive that debt that you owe us, but we're not going to give you any other dollars, and you're going to have to make it on your own moving forward. The other thing that happened was we had a Doctor of Physical Therapy program approved, and that was a self-funded program. And the arrangement on that was that the tuition revenues were to be split between the provost's office and the college, pretty much 50-50. And Janie Falk becomes provost and says, I'm not going to honor that. And so it's a long story, but even though initially she had signed off on the deal of how those revenues would be distributed. So anyway, the combination of with the president's actions and the provost's actions actually hurt the college a lot, and we were significantly in the hole and facing this budget deficit. A proposal came forward at that point. Should we either close the college, or should we merge it with Health and Human Performance? Health and Human Performance just had appointed a new dean, Steve Dorman, at the time, who was the first dean that Janie Falk had appointed. Steve, long story short, but Steve had been at the University of Florida in the early 90s when the Masters in Public Health was approved, and he was part of the group that helped bring the Masters in Public Health to the University of Florida. He comes back and sees that HHP is no longer part of that, but it's been moved over to PHHP, and says, no, that program really should be in Health and Human Performance. So he pushed for merging PHHP under Health and Human Performance. Luckily, Doug Barrett was a strong supporter, and he was a strong supporter in terms of helping us both close the budget problem in terms of coming up with additional resources for us on a temporary basis. But he also was a strong supporter in saying he was not going to allow a merger or a closure to occur. And so he said, let's put together essentially a white paper. And what I want you to do is a side-by-side comparison of the productivity of the faculty in PHHP and all the other colleges on campus. And we did that, and we had very, very strong numbers in terms of productivity, in terms of research. We were right up there with medicine, engineering, and class in terms of research productivity, and far ahead of all the others. And particularly when you looked at productivity, both teaching and research productivity on a per capita basis, the numbers were very impressive. The problem is when you look at it on a cumulative basis, it looks like a very small college. And so, but even on total awards, at the time we were, in terms of total research awards, we were bringing in twice as much in terms of research awards as Health and Human Performance. So the white paper was a really strong paper that Doug was able to take then to Bernie and to argue. Janie was arguing on behalf of HHP, Doug was arguing on behalf of PHHP. And so Doug's counteroffensive was to say that the merger should not be south to north, it should be north to south. And he went and suggested that HHP ought to be merged under PHHP. And so they essentially, it was a stalemate. And what Bernie agreed to do is he said, let's just postpone this decision for a few years and come back to it. And so through the successful efforts of Doug Barrett, the college survived. Okay. But some of the lessons learned, both from Goodekins and from Bob Frank, were that we needed to grow. And so from the very earliest times, including when I was offered the job in terms of arguing for a startup for the college, a lot of it was focused on faculty lines and getting additional faculty lines. And there was something called the Jumpstart Initiative then. And then by then, what had happened was Bernie had falling out with both Janie Falk and Doug Barrett, and both of them, went on to do other things. And we had new leadership. Which was Joe Glover and then David Gusick. And the two of them were the ones who selected actually me to move from interim to full, not to be fully appointed as dean after a national search. And they were very supportive of on my agenda was to get the college accredited, which was controversial within our college. And most people were not aware of this. The reason it was controversial within the college is that the original proposal would be that there would be two schools within the college, a school of health professions and a school of public health. So essentially two divisions within the college. And for the most part, we had very few public health faculty. We were adding public health faculty, but we had about 70 or so health professions faculty at the time, probably more than that. And the health professions faculty saw themselves as that they would lose out on this deal because any additional resources that came to the college would go to the public health side. And they were happy that I was appointed dean because my background is in the health profession side. And they assumed that what we could do now is abandon this crazy idea of moving forward and developing out public health and moving for accreditation, particularly since the budgets are so tight. Why don't we just use the budget to fill the gaps that we have and grow the health profession side? But my strong feeling was that would have been a mistake. That that would have helped in the short run, but the bigger, longer term impact that we could have as a college was by bringing public health to the University of Florida and having a school of public health. And I talked with Doug Barrett, who was very supportive. And the way Doug put it is he said, just tell the faculty, this ship has already sailed. And we're not going back to port. We're going to our destination. And our destination is to get accredited as a school of public health. Now, what we had to do was we needed to complete the build out of faculty and to get to 30 public health faculty. What we also needed to do was we needed to have 3 PhD programs in public health. We already had a PhD program in health services research, so we only needed 2 more. And we put forward the proposal, and we had to go to the Board of Governors to get approval. And this was a big challenge because the Board of Governors advised us, this is not a good time because we're in the midst of a recession to be asking for approval for 2 new PhD programs. So we persisted and we said, well, we'll take our chances. We were scheduled to go before the Board of Governors, and usually the provost presents a proposal from each any new proposals from the university. Janie Falk refused to present the proposals. She said, you're going to have to do it yourself. And so that was a little bit disappointing, to say the least. Um, I contacted Bernie Matchin, and Bernie said that he would be there and that he would back me up, and not to worry about the fact that Janie was not going to be there. You have to remember, this is this occurred during the period when I was still interim, just before I had been appointed. So this was in probably 2008, I believe, or yeah. I asked Bernie if he wanted to meet with me to review how we would present to the Board of Governors. He said, no, just send me a few bullet points. No need for us to meet. We'll be fine. The Board of Governors, I believe, was meeting at the University of, I think the meeting was at the University of Central Florida. And so I arrived and Bernie was there. And Bernie pulls me aside and he said, you know, there's significant opposition to this, including the chair of the Education Committee, who was this fellow named John Dasberg. And actually, he's a big supporter of the university. And actually, the president's house is named after him because he was the benefactor for that. But nonetheless, he was opposed to this. And Bernie says, the chair is opposed to us, but we're going to have a member propose that this just be be tabled and considered at the next meeting. The next meeting is a telephone meeting, and we think that we can have more influence over board members when it's not a televised live meeting like this one. And there's more opportunity to negotiate and get people to change their mind. So that's what my expectation was, that we were going to go in and that the motion was going to be made to table this and move it to the next meeting. We go into the meeting and I get called up to make the presentation. And then Bernie asked to speak first. And Bernie gets the microphone and says, you can, I hear that some of the members of this committee have concerns about this proposal during the time of a recession. He said, you can choose to make us a poster child for saving money, but I can tell you this, you're not going to save a red cent by preventing this proposal from going forward. 95% of the investment's already been made, and stopping it at this point will be a major mistake that you'll be making. And so I want you to make sure that you're aware of that if you're saying you're doing this to save money, you're actually throwing away money, something to that effect, because the investment's already made. We just need a little bit more time and this approval to get a return on our investment. And then they started going back and forth, and the motion never came up to table the presentation. And then they started asking about details of the public health programs and biostatistics and in epidemiology, and Bernie didn't know the answers. And so Bernie would turn to me and say, well, the dean will answer that question. And I would answer the question the best I could. And he kept referring me to the dean. And I kept thinking the reason he keeps calling me the dean is because he can't remember my name at this point in time. I was just the interim dean. Anyway, the representative from Orlando, who was on the Board of Governors at the time, makes this speech saying, you know, I've heard all the arguments today, and it makes a lot of sense that we really need to improve the public health infrastructure in the state of Florida. And to do that, we need more opportunities, educational opportunities. Now, one of the cool things that we had was we had support from the University of South Florida. The dean of the School of the University of Public Health at the University of South Florida, Donna Peterson, was a great ally. She wrote a strong letter of support saying, Florida, the state is growing. We need all the public health resources we can. There's plenty of room to have 2 accredited schools of public health in the state, if not more than that. So the representative makes this plea and he says, I call the question. And we didn't know how it was going to turn out. The chair, Dasberg, votes first and he votes nay against it. And then they poll the rest of the committee and it ended up coming out 7-4 in our favor. And so that meant that it went then to the entire Board of Governors the following day for its vote. But the tradition has always been that the big board, if you will, follows the recommendation of its committees. And that turned out to be the case that day. So the following day, the Board of Governors as a group then approved the recommendation that we get the PhD programs approved for biostatistics and epidemiology. And so we had our 3 PhD programs. So that was part of the battle. The other part of the battle was getting enough faculty members. And it's very hard to hire faculty members into essentially a professional school if you're not accredited, because faculty members don't want to leave if they're at an accredited school and go to one that's not accredited if there's not a guarantee that it's going to be accredited. And to be accredited, it also gives you the opportunity to apply for lots of grants. Oftentimes grants are limited to say like the CDC at the time would only fund grants to schools of public health that were accredited schools of public health. So we had to be really creative. We did a number of things. One of the things that we did was we borrowed faculty from other colleges. So we actually had a couple of faculty members who agreed to come to the College of Public Health and Health Professions on a 2-year contract from vet medicine. We had, I think, one from class. And then the other thing that we did was we took a number of postdocs we had and we said, hey, how would you like to be a faculty member? And we hired, and some of them were early. You know, they may have completed 1 year of postdoc, whereas typically they would have done 2 or 3. And we hired them in, but we reached the number of the minimum number that we needed. And then we went forward with the site visit, and we had some really strong internal advice in terms of how to put together a good proposal. We had good external consultants who helped us, and we put together a really, I think, strong proposal, and we were accredited successfully. And then that really opened up the door for us. It became much easier once we were accredited, both to attract faculty, but also then the numbers of students who applied increased as well. Other hiring initiatives then that came along, the next one that came along was the Preeminence Initiative. And we took the tack that we wanted to get as many positions as we possibly could for the college. And we succeeded in I've forgotten whether it was 10 or 11 preeminence hires that we were successful in getting. We also then, that was followed as the economy improved. There was the Faculty 500 initiative, and we were able to add 27 faculty members that way. And then the most recent initiative was the Artificial Intelligence Initiative, and we added another 9 faculty members that way. So we've taken advantage of these opportunities. Then the other thing that we've been able to do as we become more successful, particularly in the area of grants, is to leverage the dollars that come in. with the salary savings from grants, we've been able to create non-tenure track positions. And the biggest growth in the college has actually been in the growth in non-tenure track positions, with significant number of faculty members who are dedicated to teaching, or who are primarily as their primary assignment, or dedicated to research as their primary assignment. So in a nutshell, we succeeded in growing during my time, 15 years, from whatever is 105 to we're close to 200 faculty right now. But the lessons learned from the earlier days were the importance of getting on the radar. And so we've gone from being, we were at the time I took over, I think we were the 15th largest of 16 colleges. We're next to the smallest. I think only nursing was smaller than us at the time. And I think we're squarely in the middle of the pack now. We're maybe 8 or 9 in terms of size. So we're right in the middle of the pack. And as you know, we more than tripled our research productivity, and we're doing, I think this past year, $45 million in extramural grants, which is, just terrific. I mean, it's a significant contribution. The number of degrees that we're producing has gone up, and at the numbers that we produce and the wide array of programs that we have now, professional degree programs as well as academic programs. We have 20 different academic degrees in the college, which is perfectly in line with the perspective of Daryl Mays. So going back to Daryl Mays, our first dean, said there are a lot of health professions that are not large in terms of size, but produce people who are key professionals in the health sphere, such as physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, audiologists, that are not large enough to have their own colleges or schools, but we can provide a home for them where they can be trained. And so we've kind of fulfilled, I think, that promise of what a strong, vibrant, and large college of health professions, and in our case, public health professions, can be during this time. And some of it occurred through growth and leveraging that growth to expand our educational offerings and our research offerings, and then ultimately, as a consequence, our service offerings as well.
That's great. One of my
a long way of answering that question.
No, it's a great answer, Michael, and it reminds me that we need to do more documentation of leadership at UF during these difficult moments. I mean, I arrived in 2008, as the director of the oral history program, and the first message I received from my dean was that my OPS and OE budgets have been zeroed out. And so it was quite an experience. But and then of course, as years ensued, actually several of my former students matriculated to your college. And I was thinking of as you were talking about occupational therapy, one of our former students in oral history, Caitlin McKee, earned a doctorate in occupational therapy just a few years ago, and absolutely love the program. Michael, I wonder if we could take, I kind of apologize because we're kind of doing a zigzag in history, but I wonder if we could take a step back to when you first arrived at UF, and if you could talk about your impressions initially of the intellectual climate on campus, as well as the social climate as the campus interacted with Gainesville at the time. And I assume this is kind of your first move into kind of the deep South.
It was.
Right?
Yeah. One of the things that I was struck by during my visits as a candidate, I made 2 visits, was the social structure of Gainesville. And that the way I could see it was there was almost a caste system. where you had the university faculty who were relatively cosmopolitan and who came from different parts of not only the US, but across the globe. And most faculty members tended to live on the west side of town, north, west, southwest, west side of town. Then the other thing that was interesting was that most of the administrative staff and this, who were largely white women, the secretaries and administrative assistants, as well as the skilled laborers like the plumbers and electricians, were white, but they didn't live in Gainesville. They lived in the small towns surrounding Gainesville. And then most of the staff, that was the janitorial staff and the physical plant, people who took care of the lawns and that kind of maintenance, were African American and from the east side of town. And it was very apparent to me that there were these three groups. And while they all interacted on campus, it was also clear that after hours, these three groups didn't interact with each other much at all. And so that was some of the very first impressions that I had. The second impression that I had was related to how nice and how friendly everyone was. And coming from New York City, with a little bit of a jaundiced eye, you ask, you wonder, I always used to think, people, here's the supermarket checkout person at Publix asking me how I am and telling me to have a nice day. And my initial attitude was, do they really care about me or not? Or is this just a Southern formality? But over the years, in particular, I've come to appreciate it. And it's nice to have somebody, be genteel in their manner. And to, even if it's pleasantries, it's a lot nicer to have that and kind of the gruff aloofness sometimes that you find in big cities in the north. So I came to appreciate that. The other thing that that has had an impact on me over the years and has had an impact on some of the decisions that I've made as dean was to see the ways in which the disparities in Gainesville are perpetuated. Both of my kids are products of the public schools in Gainesville. But from the earliest days, whether it was, they were in, quote, gifted classes, and then they went to magnet programs, both from middle school, and then they both went to the IB program at Eastside, I was struck by how these programs in some ways were things that we could be proud of, but things that we need to be concerned about. If we take the IB program at Eastside, great program, they say, it's among the top 10 high schools in the country. The students do well, and my kids did well there. But if you go to a parent night at Eastside High School, you find that the corridors that are dedicated to the IB program are packed with parents. And the corridors where the mainstream families are, it's hard to find anyone there. And what you end up having is a school within its school. And as you know, the reason for the magnet schools was a way for Florida to essentially handle the order to desegregate from the 1966. And actually, I think we still may be under an injunction from one of the civil rights acts of the 1960s for a state state mandated desegregation of schools. But rather than truly integrating, what we did was create schools within schools, so that when you aggregate all the numbers of kids together, it looks like there's integration, but the kids are, in the classic sense, sitting at different tables in the cafeteria. Now, in fairness, the IB program there is no majority race or ethnicity in the IB program, in part because most of those kids are kids of faculty from UF. And so you have both white, Latino, Hispanic, and then you also have significant numbers of Asian and Indian students there. So there is no majority. But those students, for the most part, are totally isolated and separated from the mainstream kids. Now, the reason I mention this is some of the things that I've personally not been happy with as dean. And I think it was probably 3 years ago that the disparities report came out showing the enormous disparities in Gainesville between East and West Gainesville. And a number of the deans were concerned about this, and wanted to do something about it. And the president at the time was soliciting proposals for what he was calling moonshot projects. What kind of special things could UF take on? And so the deans as a group wanted to meet with him to discuss the possibility of doing a moonshot project where there would be a major investment by UF in addressing the disparities in Gainesville. And it was not, the effort was going to be focused on that we needed to address the educational issues, employment issues, health issues. So there needed to be multiple pillars to this, and that there needed to be community engagement as well. The president wouldn't meet with us. So he proposed that the provost meet with us. The provost in turn said, well, Charlie Lane has been charged with this. And we met with Charlie, and Charlie, good guy, but his perspective on this, I would say, was not in terms of either the scope and the nature of his view of what UF would contribute to this kind of project was very, very limited. And he was saying, well, we're prepared maybe to put $200,000 into a project. And, we're very interested in doing things on the other side of 13th Street. It was like, wait a second, east side of Gainesville is more than just the other side of 13th Street. And $200,000 just doesn't. And we tried unsuccessfully to push that agenda, I have to tell you. We met, we've got—
Michael, excuse me for a second. If you wouldn't mind, can you kind of tell me in terms of the agenda, kind of what was the dean's, what was your kind of collective vision, and, maybe if you remember like some of maybe the programmatic aspects of that proposal.
Yeah, so we had a series of meetings, and one of the if you look at ultimate success, Charlie was saying, well, let me give you an example. Charlie was saying, well, we have this $200,000 and we can establish a scholarship for a student who comes from the east side of town, and they can apply for the scholarship, and it would be limited to students from the east side of town. That would have no impact over the long run in changing the situation. That's why I was saying the scope of what we were talking about. We were thinking, instead of doing a massive program that would target very early on, this is just one example on the educational part, the reading skills of all the elementary students on the east side of town. And how could we marshal essentially maybe all UF students to be involved in this university-wide undertaking where everybody has a reading buddy? Because essentially, if you don't learn to read well by the fourth grade, your chances of ever even graduating from high school are essentially nil. And so you have to get in there really early. Okay. And so we had met with folks from the College of Education. They were really excited. They already were doing some pilot kinds of projects related to that. We, as a college, had already become part of a community partnership school with Howard Bishop Middle School, and which was focused on health aspects of that. So what we were trying to do is say, this ought to be something that we want to take leadership on, and where we could be a model for other universities across the country about where all 16 colleges would take some of their resources and we collectively would put it towards how can we make a difference in this community so that there's greater success in the long run. And it probably needs to start, at least start with improving the skill, the educational skills and competencies of the youngest students. We also were aware that a lot of those kids, at at Howard Bishop, just from doing the community partnership school, a significant number of those kids are from families that don't have homes, that are essentially houseless or homeless. A significant number of those kids are in the backpack program, where at the end of the week, they get a backpack filled with food supplies to bring home because of the food insecurity issues. And, it's hard to study if you're hungry. It's hard to study if, you're living out of a car. And so we wanted to do a university-wide initiative where all colleges would be involved in that. Word came back to us that this is not something the administration felt that they could get the Board of Trustees enthusiastic about, and that the moonshot projects were intended we were misinterpreting what they meant by a moonshot. What they meant by a moonshot projects were projects where we could get donors enthusiastic about contributing money to initiatives that university wanted to take on, and that this was not one that they thought that they could. Tom Mitchell and the foundation was looking for. It didn't fit with what their expectations were. There have been repeated discussions from time to time about how we could deal with this. I'm going to, I'll just continue to get myself into hot water here as I have. After the killing of murder of George Floyd, the deans met with the president, and the president talked about plans and the multi-point plan that he had. And I asked the indelicate question of what the university was willing to put in terms of resources into changing the composition of the faculty and going out and really making an effort to increase the number of underrepresented minority faculty members at UF. And he said 0. And I said, then this plan has no meaning behind it if there is no dollars, no resources associated with it. You can have a 20-point plan and whatever, but if we really are going to change things around here, we have to put resources into it. And he actually, Kent is a pretty low-key guy, but to some extent he lost his his composure and said he was, tired of people always asking for money to solve problems. And he later sent me an email, I wouldn't say apology, just explaining that he agreed with me, but his experience is that there's plenty of money out there, and that we have resources already available to the colleges, and if the colleges want to do something, they can use their resources. So what I did was I went back to our college and said, we're not going to get any help from the university, but what we can do is use some of our own resources. And we put together a PHHP faculty diversity enhancement plan. And what we did was we taxed ourselves based on the indirect cost returns that we get. And this was a little bit of kind of like saying to your kids, do you want to go to bed at 7:30 or you want to go to bed at 8 o'clock? But you define the parameters. I went to the faculty and said, do you want to do a 5% tax, 10% tax, or a 15% tax? And so they voted to support a 5% tax. And so we taxed ourselves 5%. And then we also taxed the departments and the centers. And then I put in a significant amount, both from my own IDCs. I think it was like $75,000, but we raised $1 million. And Dave Nelson had said that, he thought that if we could reach $1 million, that he could get a match for us, get another $1 million. Well, that never, we reached $1 million, but guess what? The match never came through. But with that $1 million, we were able to go out and within 1 year successfully hire 5 new faculty members, all of whom were underrepresented minority faculty members, all hired into the tenure track, including the first ever African-American tenured full professor who was also the chair of a department in the history of our college. So we did all that in 1 year, but you can't do some of this stuff without resources, And so I don't mean to be, telling tales out of school, but, it's hard to get resources to address some of these issues and to address, some of the problems that I see with at the University of Florida, including the chasing of rankings in U.S. News and World Report. So everybody's celebrating, this is second year in a row that U.S. News and Report reports Florida's tied for 5th among public universities. And, I actually, the deans get a chance to address the Board of Trustees. And when I addressed them back in April, they asked any advice that we would have for them. And I said, one of the things to be really careful about is chasing U.S. News and World Report. And I said, let me give you an example of how that is a disadvantage to students from across the state who are from under-resourced communities. The average UF student now has a GPA of 4.5 on a 4-point scale. Well, the only way you can get above 4, as you know, is by taking AP credits. And if you're from an under-resourced school, they may have very limited opportunities for you to take advanced placement courses. And so it becomes virtually impossible for you to have a GPA above 4.0. And that's not even to get into the whole issue of standardized tests, which we are still doing at the undergraduate level, and how that disadvantages people who are from under-resourced communities. But so there's, there's plenty that needs to be done, both at the student level and at the faculty level, in terms of addressing the issues related to diversity, which I think are important. And if you want, if we can go back to the last interview that we had when I talked about going to a Jesuit high school and the special commitment, of people with resources to use those resources to help those without them, you know, um, which was essentially, you know, when we talked about liberation theology at the time,
Right.
but you can do it in a secular manner as well, and just in terms of talking about equity, and a perspective on life and a philosophy on life, and in terms of how we help each other.
Well, Michael, I'm so glad that you mentioned, these great initiatives within the college, but, also this hope or this, the plan among the deans, to really make a much more substantial, positive impact on the broader region. For our next interview, I wonder if we could follow up maybe on some more thoughts on, maybe kind of taking a step back and thinking about what the University of Florida could do, in the future. I mean, we've had opportunities, we've had some successes, but then as you point out, some big misses. I just finished serving on the presidential task force with Wynn Phillips on, UF's relationship with African and Native Americans. We just finished the report. I'll send you the report. It's actually, it's on the UF's anti-racist website, which is every day I get a rumor. Oh, Paul, do you know they took it down? They took down the website. I'm like, they haven't took it down. It's still up there. But we finished the report in May. And it was a student, faculty, administrative task force. I think we did really good work. But the challenge now is to try to, and it goes back to 1853 and to present. But the challenge now is to try to make the report, have some impact. But I think your narrative is really important because it's very important for alumni and students and faculty and future administrators to think about what we've accomplished, but then also where we've come up short. And especially, it helps us kind of combat the cynicism that I encounter. I know you encounter too sometimes on campus. So, well, we can't do anything about this. University doesn't really care. I mean, your narrative shows clearly that, a lot of people care. It's just a question of, what's going to get us over the top, and so this is such an important narrative. Well, it's almost 11:30, and I suspect we have at least a couple more sessions. If I can borrow some, clinical language from you, and we can also what I'm proposing to do is to also make sure and get you a transcript of these first two interviews. Maybe we can plan to sit down if you have, I know you're really busy helping the incoming dean with that transition, but maybe, and I'm also entering Hispanic Heritage Month, which is I'm averaging one lecture per day. I mean, thank goodness for Zoom, couldn't do it otherwise. So maybe getting back together mid or late October.
So I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks in October, but late October, early November, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd be happy to do that.
Well, wonderful. Well, so hopefully in early October, we'll get a draft of a transcript to you, and you can kind of go through that. And, at that point, I'm just going to put a plea, a colleague to colleague plea. Don't redact any of it, leave it all in there.
Okay.
Because it is really so important for this university.
Okay.
And it's really it's going to be very, very impactful, I think, in the years to come. And, I think Sam Proctor was able to interview people like Chuck Young, and, he continues to have an impact in UF, and especially in recent months.
Yeah.
And Bernie Madgen too. I mean, Bernie is a neighbor. He lives just down the street, and my wife and his wife talk all the time about animals. They have a big
Yeah.
kind of love of horses and things of that nature. So these things really matter. So again, I want to thank you for your time. I know you're incredibly busy.
No, I actually, I have to correct you there. I'm a whole lot less busy now that I'm not the dean than I was as dean.
Right.
So,
Okay. Fair enough.
and I don't set an alarm in the morning, which is nice. So,
Nice.
but I'm delighted to do this and have this opportunity. I just hope that I hope I capture accurately what has occurred, or at least capture perspective that I've had on the events that have occurred.
Yeah, well, it's excellent because we have, as we have some, larger than life characters, at UF, and I've interviewed Bernie, a few times, and we had a project with, Oak Hammock over the past couple of years, and I've interviewed a lot of former administrators. I've interviewed Wynn Phillips, and he talks pretty candidly too, and so there's a lot of things. I great series of interviews with Dave Colburn before he passed away, and Dave. Well, Dave was the interim director of the Graham Center a couple of years after I arrived, and I had known him. He and my dissertation advisor had been in grad school, at the same time. And so that's how I actually met Dave. I think when he was still the dean of class, or he was every time I'd meet him, I first met him in the mid-90s when I finished my PhD exams. And he was the chair of the history department. The next time I met with him, he was in the dean's office. And the next time I met with him, he was in the provost's office.
Yeah.
And I would come down from Duke to do my research here in Florida. I ended up doing a dissertation on Florida history. And every time I came down, Dave was in a bigger office. He was just he really helped me a lot in my.
Yeah, he was a good friend. He was a good friend to our college too. He was the one who helped us put forward the proposal with Bob Frank originally to develop the College of Public Health and Health Professions, and to move it from just a master's program to a school level.
Yeah, he was a great person. All right, Michael.
Well, okay. Well, thanks, Paul. We'll look forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Have a wonderful day.
You too now. Bye.